The look on Brenda Hutchinson's face that day was worth every penny of the legal fees that followed. Imagine the most entitled HOA president you've ever met, convinced she controlled everything, and then imagine watching her realize, in front of 20 neighbors, that she had no power at all. That moment was the beginning of the end for her. But before we get there, let me tell you how it all started. How I inherited a lake, became the target of the most elaborate property scam I've ever seen, and ended up unraveling a scheme that would bring federal agents into our small Wisconsin town. 6 months ago, my life looked nothing like this. I was living in Phoenix, Arizona, divorced, burnt out from my civil engineering career, and honestly questioning every choice I'd made since college. Then came the phone call that changed everything. My grandfather Ezra had passed away. And with his passing came an inheritance I never could have expected. His lakefront estate in Millbrook, Wisconsin. Now, when I say estate, don't picture a mansion with marble floors and gold railings. Picture instead 847 acres of pristine wilderness wrapped around Crystal Lake, complete with cabins, a crumbling 1890s mill, a family home, and, most importantly, 2.3 miles of shoreline. For 60 years, my grandfather had been the unofficial mayor of that lake. Everyone knew him. Everyone loved him. He threw free fish fries every summer, let neighborhood kids learn to swim in his cove, and never once turned anyone away when they wanted to borrow a boat or fish from his dock. To the community, Ezra Thornfield wasn't just a property owner. He was the lake's guardian. And to me, he was the man who raised me on stories of stewardship, of land and water rights, of what it meant to take care of something bigger than yourself. Every childhood summer, I'd run across those docks while the scent of pine needles mixed with whatever fish Uncle Jim was cleaning. That lake was my paradise, and now it was mine. That's when I met her, Brenda Hutchinson. If you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA president, you already know her type. Brenda was 52 years old, a recent transplant from the Minneapolis suburbs, and the self-appointed Community Standards Director of Millbrook Shores. A title, by the way, she invented herself. She wore tennis whites but never held a racket, drove a spotless BMW with vanity plates reading Community, and had that smile, the kind that says, "I'm about to ruin your day." She showed up exactly 1 week after I moved in. Clipboard in hand, perfume strong enough to knock out a horse, she knocked on my door like she was serving me court papers. "Mr. Thornfield," she began, "we need to discuss your grandfather's informal arrangements with the community." Out came a 47-page community lake usage agreement she claimed I needed to sign. It required a $12,000 annual maintenance fee and granted her so-called HOA management rights over the lake. She smiled as she explained how my grandfather had always been very cooperative with community needs. Her tone made it clear she expected me to continue the tradition, or else. Now, I may have been new to inheriting a property, but I wasn't new to spotting nonsense. Something about her pitch smelled rotten. So I politely declined and told her I needed to review Grandpa's documents. Her smile froze, like ice on the lake in July. That was the first crack in her mask. The very next weekend, I threw a barbecue for some college friends. It was my first attempt at recreating Grandpa's legendary gatherings. The music was playing, burgers were sizzling, the air smelled like charcoal and lake water. Everyone was having a great time, until Brenda stormed in at 2 p.m. clipboard again, laminated violation notices this time. "Sir, this community has standards," she barked. She demanded to see a guest list like she was running Border Patrol. My friends froze mid-bite. The smell of burgers turned sour as awkward silence settled in. Within 10 minutes, she'd ruined the entire party. People packed up early, muttering apologies as if it were their fault. That night, I sat in Grandpa's study, feeling like I'd let him down. But then I remembered something he always said. When people start making claims about property, don't argue with them. Check the records. Behind a bookshelf, I found a hidden panel. Inside, a cedar chest. Inside that, original land deeds, surveyor maps, and water rights documentation dating all the way back to 1923. One document made me laugh out loud. The Crystal Lake Water Rights Grant, notarized and filed with the county. It gave my family exclusive ownership of the entire lake. Brenda's HOA, hot air, her authority, completely fake. She wasn't just overstepping, she was a con artist, running a protection racket on property she didn't own. I realized then that this wasn't just about a pushy neighbor. This was about a woman who'd been scamming people for years, and she had just picked the wrong target. The following Monday, I walked outside to find an official-looking cease and desist letter stuck under my truck's wiper. Fancy letterhead. Legal-sounding language. It claimed the Millbrook Shores HOA had exclusive rights to my waterfront and threatened $500 daily fines for unauthorized use of my own lake. I almost laughed. 10 minutes of reading told me everything I needed. It was fake. The so-called community legal services had nothing but a P.O. box for an address. Not a real law firm, not even close. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just petty harassment. Brenda had built an entire scheme. Fake fees, fake legal threats, fake authority, and my neighbors had been paying into it for years. The real question was, how far would she go to protect her scam? What started as a laugh at Brenda's fake cease and desist letter turned into a rabbit hole that shocked me. She wasn't just a nosy neighbor or a wannabe HOA boss. She was running an entire empire of fraud. Fake fees, fake signatures, fake authority. And the scariest part? Half the community had already fallen for it. The first person I went to was Dorothy Kowalski, my 78-year-old neighbor who'd lived here since the Carter years. When I showed her the letter, she laughed so hard it rattled the mugs in her kitchen. "Your grandpa never charged nobody a dime," she said as she poured steaming coffee that smelled strong enough to strip paint. "That woman came in here like a tornado talking about standards and management. We all thought she was full of hot air. But then the bills started showing up." That word, bills, made my ears perk up. Dorothy explained how Brenda had been mailing monthly invoices for lake maintenance fees. At first, people thought it was optional, but soon she hinted that families who didn't pay might lose their privileges. Before long, most neighbors were handing over $200 a month without even questioning it. I left Dorothy's house with my head spinning and walked down the road to see Jim Brennan, a retired schoolteacher. Jim was the kind of neighbor who still wore flannel shirts in July and mowed his lawn in perfect diagonal stripes. He wasted no time dropping a bombshell. "Brenda's been collecting almost $5,000 a month," he said. "That's 23 families paying her $200 each. For what? Printing fake invoices and harassing you. $5,000 a month, nearly $60,000 a year. All for nothing." Jim explained how Brenda made it sound official, throwing around words like assessment and covenant. People didn't know what they meant, but they sure knew how to write checks. The saddest story was the Hendersons, a young couple with 2 kids. Jim said they'd been paying Brenda $2,400 a year just so their children could swim. Their 8-year-old had even asked, "Why do we have to pay to swim when old Mr. Thornfield never made anyone pay?" That broke me. At that point, I needed proof. I drove to the county courthouse, a building that smelled like dust and toner, the kind of smell that tells you secrets hide in filing cabinets. Sandra, the county clerk, helped me dig into the records, and what we found was jaw-dropping. Discovery number 1. No HOA had ever been filed for Millbrook Shores. Discovery number 2. Brenda's deed gave her nothing but a yard and a driveway. Discovery number 3, my grandfather's 1963 survey maps proved our family privately owned the entire lake. I was feeling confident until Thursday, when a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. He looked embarrassed, hat in hand, as he said, "Sir, I've got a complaint against you for harassment and property destruction." Brenda was now claiming I'd vandalized the bulletin board and threatened residents. I laughed, invited him inside, and laid out my grandfather's documents. His eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be damned. She never mentioned you actually own the lake." The deputy even offered to drive with me to Brenda's place. When we arrived, there she was, watering her petunias in her flawless tennis whites, smirk plastered on her face. But as soon as the deputy explained property law basics, her smirk melted like ice cream on asphalt in July. Word spread fast after that. 3 families stopped paying Brenda immediately. The hardware store owner started telling customers that she was a fraud. But she wasn't finished. By Friday, she had taped a bright red final notice to my door, claiming my grandfather had made a verbal agreement with community elders. I ripped it down and laughed. That's when it clicked. Brenda wasn't slowing down. She wasn't embarrassed. She was doubling down. And if I wanted to stop her, I had to be ready. Because this wasn't just a scam anymore. Brenda was preparing for war. The week after I tore down Brenda's so-called final notice, I realized she wasn't going to slow down. She was going to push harder. Sure enough, flyers started appearing on mailboxes, bright yellow paper with bold black letters. Mandatory community meeting, attendance required. Brenda was calling a town hall at the clubhouse by the North Shore. Her weapon of choice this time? Public shaming. I decided to attend. Not because I owed her anything, but because I needed to see the full extent of her scam. When I walked into the old clubhouse that Saturday afternoon, I nearly laughed. Brenda had set up a podium, draped in a white cloth with Millbrook Shores HOA printed across it, as if the title itself could make it real. Neighbors filled the folding chairs, looking tense and uncomfortable. Brenda launched into a speech about protecting property values and maintaining standards. She waved around binders full of bogus paperwork, threatening that anyone who didn't pay their dues could face legal consequences. It was performance theater, pure and simple. But the part that stunned me most was how many people nodded along, too afraid or too polite to call her bluff. I raised my hand. "Excuse me," I said. "Did you register this HOA with the county? Because according to their records, Millbrook Shores doesn't have one." The room went dead silent. Brenda froze, her fake smile twitching. Then she laughed awkwardly and said, "Well, of course, the paperwork is in process." That was the first crack in her wall of confidence. But she wasn't going to let me take control so easily. She started accusing me of interfering with community harmony, and even hinted that my grandfather had promised the lake to everyone. That's when I pulled out the land deed and held it high for everyone to see. This lake has been in my family since 1923. These documents prove it. Brenda has no authority here. The neighbors started murmuring. A few looked angry, not at me, but at her. One man whispered, "So we've been paying her for nothing?" Another shook his head in frustration. Brenda saw the tide turning and slammed her binder shut. "This meeting is adjourned," she barked before storming out. After that meeting, the neighborhood split in two. Some people, furious about being scammed, stopped paying Brenda immediately. Others, still afraid of rocking the boat, continued slipping checks into her mailbox. She doubled down on intimidation, posting new rules about trash cans, lawn lengths, and boat dock hours. It was laughable. But I knew this was about more than just fake rules. She was trying to hold on to control, no matter the cost. I realized then that facts alone wouldn't be enough. If I wanted to bring Brenda down, I'd need to expose her tactics publicly and show the community who she really was. So I started documenting everything. Her letters, her notices, even her speeches. I took photos, kept records, and built a case as thorough as any FBI file. My grandfather had always taught me, sunlight is the best disinfectant. The turning point came when I found out Brenda was collecting cash. Not checks, not digital payments. Straight cash stuffed into envelopes. People would slip them under her door or leave them in a drop box she'd set up on her porch. No receipts, no accountability, just money disappearing into her pockets. That was the crack I needed. Because cash leaves no trail, but fear does. And I had more than enough neighbors who were ready to talk, especially now that the truth was leaking out. I started planning. If Brenda wanted another community meeting, I'd be ready. This time, she wouldn't be the only one with a podium. After Brenda's first meeting collapsed under the weight of her lies, I knew the next step wasn't to sit back. It was to take control. She had the neighbors rattled, confused, and divided. If I wanted to protect the lake and the community, I needed to show them the truth in a way that couldn't be denied. That's when I decided I'd hold my own meeting. The old town hall, a faded brick building near the courthouse, was the perfect place. I booked it for a Saturday afternoon and sent out simple flyers that read, "Community Gathering, Lake Property Rights." Nothing flashy, no threats, just an invitation to learn the facts. By the time the day arrived, I wasn't sure if anyone would show. But when I opened the doors, the place was nearly full. I began calmly. I laid out the history of the lake, the surveys, the deeds, the water rights, all of it. I explained how my grandfather had left the property to me, how the county records backed it, and how Brenda had fabricated an HOA that didn't exist. At first, the room was quiet, but then heads started nodding. People leaned forward, eyes wide. They weren't just listening, they were believing. Then I dropped the bombshell. Brenda had been collecting nearly $5,000 a month in cash payments. "That's $60,000 a year," I said, "and not a single penny accounted for. No receipts, no transparency. Nothing but her word." A gasp rippled through the room. One man stood up and muttered, "That's more than I make teaching school." I showed photos of the drop box on her porch, copies of her fake notices, and statements from neighbors who had been intimidated into paying. By the time I was done, people weren't whispering anymore. They were angry. Angry at her lies, at their wasted money, and at themselves for being fooled. But instead of letting that anger burn wild, I guided it. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about taking our community back." Just then, the doors at the back creaked open, and there she was, Brenda herself, walking in like she owned the place. She wore her tennis whites as usual and carried a folder stuffed with papers. She marched straight to the front, chin lifted. "None of this matters," she snapped. "These people agreed to pay. They know the rules. I've kept this lake clean for years." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Brenda," I said evenly, "do you have any legal documents proving the existence of this HOA?" She froze. Her folder slipped just slightly in her hands. She started stammering about community traditions and verbal agreements. But the neighbors weren't buying it anymore. One by one, people began standing up, not to support her, but to confront her. "I paid you 3 years straight," a man shouted. "Where's my money gone?" A woman near the front demanded, "What authority did you ever have?" Brenda's face went pale, then red, then pale again. The tide had turned. Brenda snapped. She slammed her folder on the podium, papers scattering. "Fine!" she shouted. "If you don't want me in charge, then see how you do without me. Don't come crying when this place falls apart." And with that, she stormed out, slamming the heavy doors behind her. The room buzzed like a beehive after she left. Some people cheered, others shook their heads. I stayed steady, reminding everyone that this wasn't about humiliating Brenda. It was about protecting ourselves from ever being scammed again. We agreed to form a neighborhood watch group, not for lawns or boats, but to keep an eye on accountability. For the first time in weeks, the community felt united. But I knew Brenda wasn't finished. Scammers don't just disappear, they double down. Sure enough, within days, rumors started swirling that she was consulting attorneys and planning to file a lawsuit against me. The problem for her? By now, I had more evidence than she could ever explain away. Brenda had been humiliated at the town hall, but humiliation doesn't stop people like her. It fuels them. Within a week, new flyers appeared, this time stamped with the words, "Legal action pending." She claimed she had hired attorneys who were preparing to sue me and anyone else who refused to pay. But the neighbors weren't buying it anymore. They'd seen her crumble in front of them, and now they wanted justice. The real showdown came during the town's biggest event of the year, the July 4th Lake Festival. Every family came out for it. Fireworks, barbecues, boat races. It was the one day when Crystal Lake came alive with laughter, flags, and the smell of grilled corn. My grandfather used to host it, and now it was my honor to keep the tradition alive. That's when Brenda made her move. Halfway through the day, Brenda strutted onto the main dock in her spotless tennis whites, holding a stack of papers high above her head. "Attention!" she shouted through a bullhorn. The music stopped, and people turned. "As of today, I am filing a lawsuit against Marcus Thornfield and all who defy community standards. This lake belongs to the people, not to one selfish man." For a second, the crowd froze. Then I stepped forward. Calm, steady. I didn't shout. I didn't need a bullhorn. I held up my grandfather's water rights grant and the official county letter confirming the truth. "This lake has been in my family's care for nearly a century," I said. "And Brenda Hutchinson has no legal authority. Every document she has shown you is fake." Then I dropped the final card. I revealed the sheriff's signed statement confirming there was no HOA, no legal charter, and no legitimacy to Brenda's claims. The crowd erupted, not in confusion this time, but in anger. Neighbors who had been quiet for months now shouted questions at her. "Where's our money, Brenda? What did you do with all those checks? Why did you lie to us?" Brenda's hands shook. She tried yelling back, insisting she was protecting the community, but her voice cracked, the bullhorn squealing with feedback. She dropped it in frustration, the sound echoing across the lake like a broken siren. At that moment, the sheriff stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Brenda, I think it's time you came with us." The crowd cheered, not just for me, but for the end of her reign of intimidation. Children clapped, families hugged, and the band even struck up a tune again as if to wash away the tension. For the first time in months, Crystal Lake felt free. Later that night, as fireworks exploded over the water, I sat on my grandfather's dock with neighbors by my side. We shared stories, grilled food, and laughed at the absurdity of Brenda's schemes. But underneath the laughter was relief. The scam was over, and the community was whole again. I realized then that inheriting this lake wasn't just about property. It was about stewardship, about protecting something precious from those who would exploit it. My grandfather had taught me that lesson decades ago, and now it was my turn to carry it forward. Brenda had tried to turn Crystal Lake into her kingdom, but in the end, the lake didn't belong to her, or even just to me. It belonged to everyone who loved it. Brenda never returned to the neighborhood after that night. Rumor had it she sold her house quietly and moved back to Minnesota. Maybe she found another community to try her games with. Maybe not. But here, at Crystal Lake, her reign was over. And in its place, we had something stronger than ever before: unity.